On Saturday, July 9th, area men and women joined together to honor over 9 million active military personnel who served in the Vietnam War. Of the 9 million, over 57,000 died in the longest war in history, a war which will never be forgotten. The reunion provided an opportunity for these people to find comfort among each other and share memories of the war.
Although they feel just cause for their involvement in the war, men and women alike still have to come to grips with the scars this war has left behind. There were no welcome home parades, no congratulations on a job well done, and no understanding of their torment.
The Vietnam veterans are proud to have served for the sake of their country, but still must wonder about those who are among the 2,500 still unaccounted for. 7,484 women served in the Vietnam War, and they too became adjusted to the harshness the war had to offer.
Tears are still shed today for the men and women who lost their lives. The sacrifices that were made are recognized by those who pay tribute at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and its counterpart, the Moving Wall. 58,156 names are inscribed on the wall. 8 of those names are of women. 83% of the women who served in the war were nurses.
These nurses played a big part not only in the physical well-being, but also the mental state of the soldiers. During this show entitled Women in War, we will get a closer look of what war was like for the women who comforted the wounded and the dying.
Hello, I'm Sheila Johnson.
And I'm Connie Fondren.
Welcome to Reflections.
Our show today is going to focus on women and the war. Some of our guests are nurses who served in the Vietnam War, as well as we have a couple who were in the military. So stay tuned for more on women and war.
Welcome back. With us today, we have Kathy Perrine and Judy Gillette, 2 women who have served in the Vietnam War. How are you ladies doing?
Fine, thank you.
That's good. Kathy, what was that determining factor that made you decide to go into the Vietnam War?
Well, when I was in nurses training, I wrote to my cousin, and he was in country for a year in one of the hotter areas. And actually, my whole class used to wait for his letters to come, and then we'd get together and we would write back to him. Then when we got to be seniors, that was when we were probably second-year students. When we got to be seniors, some of us ran a little short of cash. We had to support, to get ourselves through the rest of the year. And they had a program called the Army Nurse Program, and they paid us as privates for 1 year, or for about 8 months for the last year, and then we gave them 2 years of service. And 4 in my class did that, and 4 of us went to Vietnam, but that's how I joined.
And how did you go about deciding you wanted to serve?
I was already a registered nurse and working in surgery here in St. Louis at St. Anthony's Hospital. In fact, I'd been in surgery for 3 years. I wanted to do something with more meaning, I believe, and I had a choice of either going into the Peace Corps at that time or something along that line. In fact, I took the written exam for the Peace Corps and passed it. And I happened to open a magazine one day, and there was a full-page article about Army nursing, and they had a picture of a GI, an American GI, with a patch over his eye, and he looked very sad and looked like he needed to be taken care of. And down at the bottom of the page it said, "The Vietnam War, won't you please help?" And it was a recruiting article for nurses. So I called several branches of service to see if I could get to Vietnam to serve as a nurse. And the last one I called was the Army Nurse Corps, and they said they would not only take me, but I could go to Vietnam immediately. And really about 8 weeks later, I was in Vietnam.
Wow. Was it what you expected it to be? heard
No.
different stories where, people get over there and it's like,
It
a
was,
real big shock to them.
I think Kathy will agree. We were very young.
Naive.
No one really knew about what was going on in Vietnam at that time. As nurses, we were not prepared by the Army before we went over there to fully understand the shock of taking care of real combat victims. You have to understand, too, that the velocity of the weapons used during the Vietnam War did a great deal more tissue damage to the human body than in the previous wars. So in many areas, medically, surgically, we were breaking ground in treatment. I think if I could say anything to young nurses now who might be sometime in the future serving the way we served during a war, I would want to prepare them in some way, prepare them for what the reality of war is for nurses and how to protect themselves psychologically during a war.
Was it what you thought it was going to be?
Well, first of all, I was stationed right after my basic training. I was sent to Walter Reed for I was supposed to be there for a year, and several of us at that time volunteered to go to Vietnam. And we were activated with the 67th Medical Evac Hospital, and we were given orders one day prior to our departure. I think, if I recall, I don't know, it's 20 years ago, it's hard to say, but we were told we were going somewhere to pack our winter gear, Army winter gear, and Army summer gear. We were either going, very secretly, we knew we were either going to Vietnam or to Korea. We did not know where we were going until we arrived at Tan Son Nhut Air Base. Well, by the time we were in Hawaii, we had a pretty good idea where we were going. But our whole unit went over as one big medical detachment. Did yours?
No, I went over all by myself with 200 men.
Wow.
Yeah, and they were all young fellows that were drafted. They were all very frightened, nervous. I wasn't until I got on the plane with them because I was simply too ignorant. I assumed what I had been told stateside was true, and that was that I would be with a medical unit that would be behind the lines. The actual truth of the matter was I was assigned immediately to the 3rd MASH hospital, and we were never behind the lines. We were always being mortared, had snipers in the compound. Once we were gassed. And ammunition dumps blowing up and blowing the hospital away. And I mean, we were very much in actual combat. There have been 8 nurses that were killed in Vietnam.
What was the major role that the nurse played in Vietnam? Some people say, the nurse was a mother and sister, but the nurse also had to go through different techniques from what you do in a hospital, the emergency room, the triage. Now, what was the biggest role that you played in the war?
Super nurse.
Yes. Oh, I could say so much. Being a nurse in a war is the absolute pinnacle in the profession of nursing as far as I'm concerned. After all, our whole profession began with Florence Nightingale, and she started as a war nurse.
Right.
You never find a need greater than your country's best young men being terribly, horribly wounded. You provide many services and you are filling many roles. Yes, these men in the Vietnam War were teenagers for the most part, and we found ourselves in the role of mother, particularly when they were dying. Many times I have held, some of this is still raw, many times I held men who were crying for their mothers while they died. We were also looked upon as the idealized round eye, the female from back home, and there was a lot of romantic fantasizing that went on, and and funny things like guys saying they didn't want to go to sleep for surgery, they wanted to look at the round eye. Well, you know, we took this with a grain of salt, and we loved them very much. We were their sisters. We were their confessors. Many of them would get letters from home that they needed to cry about, and they would come to us. But the biggest role we played was our professional role, and that took a great amount of stamina and skill and energy. Most of us, when we returned from Vietnam, had dropped 30, 40 pounds just from the difficulty there.
How long were you in Vietnam?
1 year.
What about you?
I was there a year and a half. I was a little different from Judy. I was in an evac hospital, which was more in a safe area. We were on the coast. There were 2 hospitals in our town. That should have told you that it was considered safe. We had the 85th evac hospital. When I first went over, that was in Quonset huts, and our unit was attached to them. And we spent about 8 months until our hospital was built. And when our hospital was built, our whole unit then staffed that hospital. And the one thing that I can say for it is we did have flush toilets. That might sound funny, but that's the truth.
That was wonderful.
That was wonderful. I don't know. I would like to say that the men in Vietnam, in fact in any war, have always had the best medical support any nation can give. The corpsmen in the field in Vietnam did an outstanding job. We got men that shouldn't have been alive, and they were. They just did wonderful things. Then they came to us, and we patched them up and either sent them back or sent them to Cam Ranh Bay, or we sent them home, mostly to Japan, to other hospital facilities, because our hospital yours was a MASH hospital, and you just did surgery and shipped them out. We did have areas where people with punji stick wounds would have initial surgery, initial debridement, back for closure, and then back to the lines. And that was sort of sad.
I understand that you all had a reunion a couple of weeks ago. Can you tell us a little bit about that reunion?
Well, that's why I'm here. I haven't really spoken a whole lot about Vietnam until now. Judy spoke to a group of veterans about a year ago. That was her first experience.
Yes.
And St. Peter's had a welcome home too, and I would like to thank the people of St. Peter's. And the only name that comes to mind right now is Sharon Ambrose. A lot of them were responsible for bringing the wall, the traveling replica of the wall, to Mid-Rivers Mall, and it was there for about 10 days. It left yesterday afternoon, Friday, or last evening. And it was really great. The only thing I have to say is all you men certainly aged over these last 20 years. I remember a lot of baby faces, and you're not babies anymore. So.
Have you received any negative feedback from people when they find out you're a Vietnam veteran?
One of the reasons, to answer your question, one of the reasons that so many nurses are just now coming out of the closet, like I just came out of the closet a year ago, is because when we first came home, we were treated just like the male Vietnam vet, which was with disrespect, rejection, and worse. When I got off the plane in San Francisco, I was still in my fatigues. As a matter of fact, I had been operating right before I left Vietnam. And some people passed me, and I heard these 2 ladies discussing me. I suppose they hadn't seen an Army nurse in fatigues before, and they weren't real sure what I was. And the one lady inquired, the other lady said, "Oh, she is an Army whore." This was the attitude that I came back to after having worked very hard for my country. This does not encourage discussion about Vietnam. So for years, I kept quiet about it. Now, I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about Vietnam because I'm proud of what our guys did there. And I knew them, and I know how hard they fought. They were true heroes in my mind for many reasons. They were not supported by their own country that sent them. They were rejected. It was a war that was never going to be won. All those of us who served in country knew that. We knew that almost from day one. So those were very difficult circumstances for any young men to fight under. And they were teenagers, remember. In my mind, that makes them heroes. But anyway, now I do enjoy discussing it so that I can sing their praises, you know? They've waited a long time for the American people to say, welcome home. We loved you for what you did. We have loved them for 20 years. I am grateful that we have the opportunity to speak today on behalf of all Vietnam veterans.
What kind of feedback did you get when you came back home?
I was a little luckier. First of all, I'm sure you had the same experience. It took us about a month for cultural shock.
Oh, really?
Well, we didn't have telephones like y'all did. The first time I got on a freeway, I panicked. I really did. I mean, we were used to going 15, 20 miles an hour. That was fast. 65 was very fast. I went to a small hospital. I was out of the service. I got out in Portland, I think, or Seattle, and went right home, still in uniform. I can't say anyone came up and shook my hand. I got a lot of looks. But I went to a small hospital in Georgia, and there was a woman there, an older woman. Her name was Mrs. Grover, and she introduced me around as Kathy. She was a Vietnam nurse. So I really didn't come home to any discouragement. In fact, I really felt proud of it. No one asked me any questions, and I don't know if I would have answered them at the time, you know. My family was always supportive. I know yours was too.
Yes, my family has sustained me the past 20 years because I, like many nurses who came back from Vietnam, have suffered from a condition known as post-traumatic stress. I didn't even realize that I had post-traumatic stress until last year, which is a whole subject in itself. And they're doing a lot of programs now around PTSD, they call it. But medical people, particularly the medics out in the field, and people in very active trauma situations in Vietnam, quite naturally suffered post-traumatic stress.
I would imagine.
Very natural. But we did not know about it. We were not debriefed when we came home. We were not educated about our own psychological states, which I just find almost unforgivable of the government. I really do. There's a lot of people that have been damaged simply because they weren't debriefed and they weren't educated psychologically.
Well, how do you feel about that?
I have been very fortunate. I went over with a roommate to Vietnam. We served together. She went home 6 months ahead of me, but I've always had someone to talk to. Now, granted, for 20 years, no one's asked very many questions, and a lot is really lost. I don't remember a lot. We were talking about that. Judy's the first nurse other than my roommate that I've met. And we were talking about some of the things we've forgotten. And I called my roommate after the reunion, and she said, oh, it was so great to hear me so excited about Vietnam, because I hadn't really talked to her about it. We mentioned things in passing. And now she's going to go to the Welcome Home, I think, in Washington, D.C. There's supposed to be another one sometime. It's different. I think because I did have the support and because of my initial reaction coming home that I have been very fortunate. I haven't had the psychological problems. I guess that answers your question.
When you're talking about the reunion and the moving wall, what are your feelings about the wall, getting the wall, and about the females and this woman's Vietnam memorial?
Well, I was in Washington about 2 years ago, and I wasn't able to go to the wall. I had the opportunity, and I thought I would just pass. I was able to go to the little memorial that they had in Mid Rivers, and it was quite moving, and I'm glad they made the memorial. It needed to be done. And I really wasn't in favor of having the nurse's statue immediately because I thought we were represented by the men. I became enraged when I heard we weren't going to get it because some man in the Department of the Interiors who has never served his country, and I'd like to ask him why he didn't, decided that if they gave a memorial to a woman, and there have been nurses in every war,
Right.
and we have served well, and
Right.
we did a good job.
Yeah.
And the whole medical corps did. Gee, even the dust-off pilots, I wouldn't want their job. But this gentleman decided that if he gave us a memorial, he would have to honor all the other different corps, even the Canine Corps.
Oh, no.
That was his statement, and it's in the. They have the article somewhere in the papers. Now, how do you feel? Were you in favor of the memorial right away?
No, I think we sisters, we nurses who served in Vietnam, we are still so protective of the male Vietnam veterans. And we're so proud of them that we want them, we still place ourselves in this servant role. We want them to have all of the glory, and that's natural. However, since I have become healthier, I'm beginning to take a real pride in what my sisters and I did. You know, it's very difficult to take a woman and put her into a combat situation.
I agree.
It goes against our very nature. We are succorers of life. You know, we do not take life. It's hard to see that day after day. Now I very much like to see our country acknowledge that its women serve just as well as the men do. And this, to me, is not taking anything away from the men or their service or the statues. I have personally been to the wall in D.C., and I've seen the statue of the three men, and I've seen the wall, and I was absolutely devastated because it hit me so hard, you know. Yes, I definitely think that our country owes us this. I really do.
Okay. Well, do you think we're progressing? I know it's been a while. Every now and then you hear about females who have served in the war. It's not an ongoing thing like the males. It's always the male, the male, the male. Do you think we're progressing any in that direction as far as honoring these women who have really served in the war? Like you said, it goes back to Florence Nightingale.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it does. Of course, we're progressing, but it's so slow.
Right.
It's so very slow. And I lay that at my country's feet. We have always been here. They have just failed to recognize us and what we have done. You have to remember, many of us, and I include myself here, lost 20 years to that war because of post-traumatic stress syndrome. 8 of us lost our lives, excuse me, lost our lives there. Many of us were wounded. Most nurses who were wounded in Vietnam never received a Purple Heart. I was wounded in Vietnam. I did not receive a Purple Heart. The reason was we wouldn't ask and we wouldn't accept because the trauma we saw every day was so great that a little wound to us meant nothing. That's all.
Okay. How do you feel about that?
I forgot the question. I was listening to Judy. Whether women have come forward in
Right.
service. As Judy says, it's very slow. We've been there a long time. Whether as an officer or enlisted, there are women serving today, and you never see very many pictures of them.
Right.
They do a good job. I guess they deserve a little recognition. Could I talk about somebody or some people that I'd like to talk about?
Sure.
Okay, this is Women at War. While we were overseas, there were an awful lot of entertainers that came through the hospitals and really came and entertained the troops. And Nancy Sinatra is one that comes to mind. I don't know how a lot of the men got back to their bases because they all threw their boots on the stage when she sang, "These boots are made for walking." I mean, I cried. They were throwing their boots. Someone else that comes to mind is Anne Margaret. I got to meet her because she was sick while she was in country. She had talked to so many people and eaten at so many mess halls that she couldn't talk, and she had a fever of about 102. But to my knowledge, she never missed a show. She took 2 hours out to lay in our quarters for a little while and to get some. It was my job to find some honey. I got a sergeant that knew where to get it for me. But she did a wonderful job. Vicki Carr, I remember her coming, and Martha Ray. I don't think there was a foxhole in Vietnam that she wasn't in. She was behind every sandbag. She spent a good deal of her time just talking to the troops. And, you know, we talk about someone that I'm not going to mention. She gets an awful lot of recognition. She's insignificant. Some of these other ladies.
Jane Fonda.
Hanoi Jane.
Hanoi Jane.
Yes. I have a picture of her with the gunners.
Right, I've seen
and
that.
The picture said, at the time, the caption under it said, "Shoot those American pigs out of the sky." My husband was a pilot in Vietnam. I really take... I don't go to her movies. I don't support her, and I wish everyone else wouldn't either. But the ladies that did come over and that did talk to the men, and they were wonderful people, and we don't hear very much about them.
Right. Well, I think it's good that they took time out to come over and, you know, to visit and give you that morale that you really needed.
Well, it was another little bit of round eye.
Yes.
And, you know, the men were great. I remember them with a great deal of humor. You can't take an 18-year-old guy and have him really hurt, and you go to give him a pain medicine right after. My roommate reminded me of this. I've blocked a lot of this part out. She went to give this 18-year-old guy his first injection after post-op, and he was in pain. And he said, "No, ma'am, I don't need that shot. I'm airborne." That was the way the guys were. I mean, they were just wonderful. I worked on a ward that was post-op, and we had a great deal of trouble getting down to bed at night because the big game was to say airborne, and my guys would jump out of their beds in casts. That was to prove that they were really still airborne. That was great.
Well, stay tuned. We'll be right back after this. Welcome back. With us this segment, we have Terry and Linda Toenges, two Vietnam veterans who just happen to be married. Hi, how are you all doing?
Just fine.
Fine, thank you.
That's good. Now, how did it come to be that a Marine married an Army WAC?
I met her at work. We had both worked for the Vietnam Veterans Leadership Program, and got to be real good friends after that. And things just sort of happened.
Okay, we have a Marine. You were a Marine combat, right?
Yes, I was in the infantry in Vietnam.
Could you just give a little bit of, since we're talking about women in war, what the males perceived the women's role in Vietnam?
Well, the majority of the women had just as big a role as we did. My time in Vietnam, I think maybe I saw an American woman maybe once or twice, and those were the Red Cross workers. I was fortunate in the fact that I never got wounded, or perhaps I might have seen a lot more of the nurses, and in that respect, I'm glad I didn't see much of them.
And for you, Linda, when we're talking about females who served in the war, even female veterans, you yourself being a veteran, what kind of treatment do you get, or what kind of treatment did you get then and now?
The perception of the female veteran I was dealing with as when I started to join service. My family would say I wish you wouldn't. The only women who are in the service are whores and lesbians, and that's not at all true. I wanted to join the service for a career. I was treated decent by the men in the service. I was never treated like anybody else other than one of the guys. And I had gotten married while I was in the service. So I never had any animosity or anything. But the medical care for the female veteran upon the release of the service is different, totally different. The women are not treated at all properly at the VA facilities. We go to the VA facilities only because we can't afford to go anywhere else. And in my personal opinion, they should be shut down so that the veterans can go to their own civilian doctors. And there would be a lot less problems because of the bad medical care they get at the VA hospitals. Now, granted, there are a few good doctors, but there's a whole lot more that's not. Now, when I was admitted to the hospital in St. Louis, I had a nurse to come in with an attitude to my room and tell me that she thought that I felt that I was very, very lucky to be in there with all those men. And I said, excuse me, but I'm sick. I don't care about all these men. And the only TV we had was in the day room. And I wasn't allowed to go to the day room because I was a female. And they didn't like the female in their pajamas and robe mixing company with the males in their pajamas and robe.
So they had no separate quarters for you?
We had separate quarters, yes. I had my own room.
Okay.
But no TV.
No entertainment at all for you?
No. I did crossword puzzles a lot until I got fed up with it and went down on my own and let them throw me out of the day room. That's what I had felt at the time.
What made you decide to join the war, join the Army, excuse me?
I had always, from a small child, wanted to do something that would help my country. I had been raised patriotic. Then when I got older and I saw all the things on the news about Vietnam, I would watch the news and see, I mean, we have to remember Vietnam was the first war that you could see fought live because of our media.
Right.
And I would see these guys falling. Now, I could never stand blood and guts, so I didn't want to go into the nurses' corps. But I did join the postal service in the Army, and I wanted to make a career of it. I was unable to because I was injured, and therefore civilian life was the only thing that I could do.
And Terry, why did you join the Marines?
Well, back at the time, there were all of my friends whose birthdays had fallen right before me, and they were all getting their draft notices, and I knew my time was coming.
Oh.
So I thought, well, I can wait and be drafted by the Army, or I can go be the best and be a Marine. So I chose the Marines. There was no doubt in my mind when I joined the Marines where I was going, but I felt we had a right to be there, and I felt we were doing the right thing. I just wanted to go do my part.
Now, how long did you serve?
I was actually in Vietnam only a year. I was in Vietnam from April of '69 to March '70.
Okay.
That reunion we talked about early in the segment and the moving wall, you both were at the reunion. And how does that make you feel to finally have this welcome home and the moving wall? What does that put in your mind about them?
I love the reunions. I've been around the country to different reunions that they have. I've been to the wall in D.C. 4 times. To me, it's kind of a healing process. I've had some problems with post-traumatic stress. And getting back together with the guys some of the guys that I've served with, I've met people who I hadn't seen in 20 years, and the camaraderie is excellent. Back in Vietnam, everyone got along and everyone was really close together. And since coming back from Vietnam, I just haven't felt that until I started going to these reunions. And everyone looks out for everyone else. It's like one big happy family.
And Linda, how did you feel about it?
About the wall?
Yes, the wall and the
real-
reunion.
I'm real proud of the wall. I don't have too many people that I knew real close that's on the wall, but I'm real proud of the United States finally recognizing a Vietnam vet. And as far as the reunions, I always look in faces to see if there was somebody that I served with, but it's been so long ago, and they've changed so much that I doubt if I'd recognize anybody anyway.
Well, we're talking about memorials and this women's memorial that was passed in Washington. What are your feelings about it?
My feelings about the memorial was the nurses that are on the wall deserve some kind of recognition. The wall is for the dead. The statues are for the living. But I believe that the wall is no place for politics. And the woman who pushed so hard to get the wall, get the memorial for the women, is only 26 years old, and she did it for the equal rights. Now, I believe in equal rights too, don't get me wrong. I want pay just like my husband does. But I don't believe that the wall is a place for the politics, because that's all it was to begin with, a political war. I'm sorry, but that's the way I feel.
Right. What other positions were available for women who wanted to serve in the Vietnam War besides being a nurse?
There was postal, as I was in.
Right.
There's administration. But the nurses, I'm so proud of our nurses because they were there. They saw people. They saw life and death. Okay, the combat vet did too. But from a woman's point of view, I'm real proud of them.
When you were talking earlier about the hospitals, the VA hospitals, when was that? Like how long ago, and is that still going on now, the treatment that the female veterans are getting?
About 2 years ago was when I was treated this badly by these nurses. I was at the VA hospital about 1.5 years ago. I was put in the hospital supposedly from mononucleosis. Now this is all documented, okay? I was misdiagnosed as having mono. They said the tests were negative, but I probably had it anyway. They sent me home. A few days later, said that the only cure was juices and plenty of rest. Well, over about a month period of time, I kept getting worse and worse, and I got so weak I couldn't get out of bed. Well, my sister took me to the VA hospital. I sat there for 9.5 hours with 103 temperature. The doctors went home, and I had to go around to the emergency room. They said they would call me the next day if the tests were anything serious. I waited for the call. I didn't receive it. I called them and said I wanted to know what the test results were because I was so very ill. And they said that they lost the results, and they would have to look for them and, quote, frankly, they didn't have time, unquote. I went to a civilian doctor. It turned out I had rheumatic fever, caused from strep throat being so bad so long. And now I have a huge hospital bill to pay because of their negligence. And the thing is, you have recourse with civilian doctors, legal recourse, but you don't with the VA. You can't sue the VA. And you can't hire an attorney for over $10 to sue the VA. That's why I believe that the VA hospital should be done away with.
Besides doing away with the hospitals, what changes can they do? Who could you go to get those changes?
I think that if our congressman would make some kind of an arrangements like they do with the civilian hospitals. Okay, civilian hospitals, they have people come around to make sure they're clean. I've been in rooms that had gunk on the walls. I had pulled out accidentally an IV out of my arm when I turned over in my sleep. I went to the hall to ask a nurse to come down to help me with the blood dripping from my arm. She said, in a minute. I went back to my bed. I sat there, and I wondered if I would shut the IV off, would that stop the bleeding, or would that cause some serious problems for me, because I don't know that much about the medical part. So I put my arm up on the tray where we have our meals and watched it drip on the floor. The blood stayed in the floor at least 3 days, until finally I asked a janitor going down the hall, would he please come and clean up the blood out of my floor? And he did.
Why do you think that they treated the women who had served in the war like that?
Because of the old stigma of whores or lesbians. I really believe that. And I think women, these women who never served in the service, I think they feel like, well, you were with all these guys. But it's so untrue.
Right.
I mean, women work on the roads, the highway department, and they're not bedding all the guys.
Right. Well, Terry, what changes would you like to see being made?
As far as the VA?
Right.
Excuse me. Well, I know what she's been going through because, you know, I've been living with it. And I don't necessarily feel they should abolish the VAs, but perhaps a little better system. And I do feel that the women should be treated a lot better. The VAs are predominantly geared to the male veterans, but there are becoming more and more female veterans, and they need to be taken care of just as well as the male veterans, because they, you know, they earn the right, and they deserve it too.
Linda, what would you tell young ladies that are thinking about going into the military but still, hear the myths about it? What would you tell them?
I believe that the perception of the old stigma of whores or lesbians, I believe that is changing because of the military now, the new modern day military. Maybe some people feel it's not as efficient, but there are a huge number of women that's joining the service now. I think it's wonderful. I have a 17-year-old daughter and an 18-year-old son that I would love for them to join the military. It teaches you to respect yourself. It teaches you to be proud of yourself, to be independent, to have pride in your country. I remember graduation day from basic training. I was so proud I could have busted at the seams.
How long were you in the military?
I was in a year and a half before I was injured.
What do you both do right now?
Well, I'm a full-time student at Webster University in media communications, and I work part-time for the Vietnam Veterans Leadership Program, which is where I met her to begin with.
What does this program do for the Vietnam veterans?
Anything we can, really. We have a job development program where a lot of it's geared toward helping veterans find jobs. We work with the VA with a homeless program, helping homeless veterans. We're involved a lot in a lot of social activities having to do with veterans, and basically anything we can do to help a vet, we will, no matter what it is. Emergency food, emergency clothing, we can help get them into a shelter. And we're gearing up now for a business incubator program, working with veteran entrepreneurs and those veterans who would like to get into their own little business. And we've got quite a few programs going on now, and things are looking up.
And I work for ARPERCEN, that's Army Reserve Personnel Center. I'm an analyst for the physical evaluation section of the Surgeon General's office at the Federal Record Center on Page. We do go to various activities. I go with my husband, of course. And right now we're staunch into the POWs, it's the prisoners of war, missing in action. There are still over 2,400 missing in action, and we want our guys brought home. If they're alive, bring them home. I'm not 100% sure that there are guys alive, but we need to establish some form of precedence so that when my son goes to war, or my grandson, and it's gonna come sooner or later, I want to rest assured that our government will do everything possible to bring my son and my grandson back home.
To your knowledge, what is being done about these prisoners of war right now?
There's supposedly negotiations in effect. There's several congressmen, I don't know their names offhand, but I can get them, that are offering $1 million reward for some member of Southeast Asia, maybe political party or whatever, to bring out one live prisoner of war, and that's all we need is one prisoner of war. And the POW MIA is offering another large separate reward for one prisoner of war to be returned. Only that's into supposedly over $2 billion right now. So we're hoping there will be some response. There is a lot of coverage, a lot of documents that prove that there are live prisoners of war.
Oh, really?
Yes, there is. And there's just too much documentation to be ignored. My husband can tell you more about it than I can, I'm sure.
Why don't you give us a little more information?
No, I personally think there are live Americans over there. When the prisoners were returned in '73 and the peace treaties were signed in that, Laos never returned any POWs to the best of my knowledge. Or there might have been a couple, but there are numerous pilots shot down over Laos who were never returned and never heard from. The POWs that were returned in '73, there were a lot less than the American government had documented proof that they were captured, but they were never returned. There's a lot of high-level negotiations going on with Vietnam for the return of the prisoners, and little by little, Vietnam keeps dribbling them back, 20 sets of remains here, 20 sets of remains there. But there's really no progress as far as any live Americans. Vietnam claims that there are no live Americans under their control, but yet there have been numerous live sightings of American POWs. And there's a lot of politics involved because the United States wants Vietnam out of Cambodia, and which is, right now Vietnam's in very poor shape economically, and they want money. And the POW issue is involved with that. They want money. I say, well, if you give us money, we'll give you back some POWs. The U.S. says, well, we can't do that until you pull out of Cambodia. And everything is so intermingled with the politics of it that, and in the meantime, there might
be still some
guys over there suffering.
Besides reunions and the welcome home, things that go on like at St. Peter's, how do you see the Americans accepting the Vietnam veterans? Are they opening up more?
I definitely feel they are.
Yeah, I think there are. There are a lot more reunions and parades and things like that taking place. And for a while, it was just the Vietnam veterans themselves getting these things together. But now, the American public's becoming more and more involved, and it's the American public that are putting the things on for the veterans now. But initially, it was the Vietnam veterans that had to get things started for themselves. For a large part, Vietnam veterans were ignored and mistrusted. A lot of things like that over the years, and we basically got things started. Now, a lot of the people are learning more about what we're going through, what we've gone through, and I think they're becoming a lot more supportive.
Was the war anything like what you expected it to be once you got over there? I hear all these stories
it definitely wasn't like combat on late night TV. Because I'd watched all the old John Wayne movies.
Right.
and
You see
things
all
like
these
that.
movies and
But I found that getting over it, it's not only seeing it on a picture tube, but you can smell it, you can feel it, you can hear it, you live it, you breathe it. And it's, I did have a few good times over there, but, you know, I'd say they were far outweighed by the bad times. But by the same token, if it was necessary, I'd go back again. If I had the opportunity to go back there after some of the guys that we left behind, I wouldn't hesitate to go. I'm a little older now and maybe not as physically fit, but if I thought there was a chance of bringing back one POW, I'd go.
But you know, I find that a lot. I find a lot of people saying that, and I work with a lot of vets, and so many of them had said, let me go. I'll bring somebody back home. Just let me go. Oh, definitely. I'd say 9 out of 10 combat vets are willing to go back.
that's interesting.
Do you think the movies that they have out, like Platoon, Heavy Metal Jacket, or even the series that comes on TV, do they portray the war as it really was, or are they just, you know, commercializing it?
Yeah.
Well, Tour of Duty I like. For me to sit down and watch Tour of Duty, it brings back a lot of memories. But there are mistakes, errors in Tour of Duty that I can see, little things that someone who wasn't there wouldn't pick up. But there were mistakes in the war too. So that goes without saying. Movies like Platoon was an excellent movie. It was very realistic. I guess really Rambo was the movie that really started the craze or whatever. And Rambo got a lot of bad reviews, bad raves because of all the violence. But not enough people really sat down and listened to what Rambo had to say throughout the movie. He brought up a lot of valid points, which to me really meant a lot. Once you looked past the violence and the bloodshed and the bullets and all that, if you really watch Rambo and listen to the things Rambo has to say, a lot of them are very true. One instance in particular, he says something to the effect, to survive a war, you have to become war, which we survived the war, we became war, but the only trouble was, once we came home, no one taught us how to unbecome war.
Right, how to readjust.
Yeah, and that's, and Rambo has done a lot for the POW issue also, as far as bringing it into the limelight.
Well, did you have a problem with readjusting once you got back to the States?
I did, but I didn't realize it until a couple of years ago. I stopped by a vet center one day because I was having some problems, and the more I talked, the more I learned that a lot of the things that I had been doing for the past 17, 18 years were a result of things that happened in Vietnam, and seeing close friends killed, things like that, just the life that I lived, things that I had done over there that I'm not necessarily proud of. And I just thought I was normal. Or I wasn't sure what normal was, but I knew that I was having a lot of problems. I had a drinking problem for a while. And I thought, well, a lot of people have drinking problems.
Right.
But I talked to some of the counselors at the vet center, and as far as I'm concerned, they basically saved my life. They did a world of good for me with counseling, and allowed me to see some of the things that I had been doing, some of the things that I was doing to myself, and why I was doing it to myself. I got involved in the rap groups at the vet center, which did me a world of good just to sit down and talk to another group of veterans
Right,
who
I
had
guess
been
they
to
would,
Vietnam,
huh?
which is something that I hadn't done in, since Vietnam. And it's like you have all this pent up inside here, and to sit
Right,
down with somebody else that knows what you're talking about, just let it all out, was a tremendous burden lifted off my shoulders.
What
Good.
would would you tell the young generation, the little kids who are growing up and who are, hearing about, not really understanding what war is, but they see the cartoons depicting war, they see toys, guns. How would you tell them about war, and especially about Vietnam?
It hurts. I don't believe the world will ever be free of war. As long as one person wants what another person has, there's going to be war. And it's what I would tell someone, boy, I know they're going to have to go sooner or later. I know it's coming. And the only thing I could do if someone were to ask me were to give them the benefit of my advice or my experience. I hate the thought of anyone having to go back into war, but, I know it's going to be necessary. And there's no way anyone's going to be able to prevent it unless someone pushes the nuclear button and we're all extinguished.
Right.
But it's true that war is hell. And it stays with you. You can't just go fight a war for a year and come back, because after that year, the war will be with you for the rest of your life. And a lot of times it's not an easy thing to do.
There is a need in your own hometown. Please join your local chapter.
First, we'd like to thank our guest for joining us today.
And we'd like to thank those people who sponsored the moving wall and the reunion in St. Peter's. We would also like to dedicate this show to all the men and women who served in the Vietnam War.